"Lost your tour group, Grandpa?" The voice, sharp and laced with condescending amusement, cut through the morning haze over the training grounds. Sergeant Evans, a man whose crisp uniform and chiseled jaw seemed designed for shouting, stepped in front of the old man. The recruits in the formation behind him, barely out of their teens, shifted their weight, a few of them snickering into their collars. Glenn Whitman, 84 years old, did not move. He stood in the formation as if he belonged there, his back straighter than men half his age. His hands, gnarled with time, rested calmly at his sides. His eyes, pale blue and clouded by age, held a placid depth that seemed to absorb the sergeant's hostility without reflection. He wore simple khaki pants and a worn red jacket that looked 50 years out of date. Evans's lips curled into a smirk. He circled Glenn like a predator sizing up peculiar prey. "This is an active firing range, old-timer, not a museum. Are you deaf? I asked you a question." A few more nervous laughs rippled through the ranks of the recruits. To them, this was a welcome break from the relentless drilling, a bit of unexpected theater. They saw a confused old man who had wandered into the wrong place, a harmless relic about to be chewed out by their formidable drill sergeant. They saw the faded nondescript patch on his sleeve, a circle of drab green with some kind of unidentifiable gray stitching, and some of them nudged each other, whispering jokes about what antique store he'd found it in. "I know where I am, Sergeant." Glenn's voice was quiet, yet it carried a surprising resonance. It was a voice that didn't need to be loud to be heard. The simple, respectful reply only seemed to stoke Evans's irritation. He thrived on fear and intimidation, and this old man offered him neither. He jabbed a finger toward Glenn's chest. "You know where you are? Then you know you're trespassing on a United States Army training facility. That's a federal offense. You're interfering with the training of soldiers. So I'll ask you one more time before I have the MPs drag you out of here. What are you doing in my formation?" Glenn's gaze drifted past Evans, toward the distant hills shimmering in the heat, his expression unchanging. "I'm here to remember." "Remember?" Evans scoffed, his voice dripping with theatrical disbelief. He turned to his recruits. "You hear that, ladies? The old man is here to remember. Maybe he forgot where he parked his horse and buggy." The laughter was louder this time, more confident. Evans fed on it. He was the master of this small universe, and he was putting on a show. He stepped closer, his face inches from Glenn's, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "Your little trip down memory lane is over. I want to see some identification, now." Glenn slowly reached into his old jacket, his movements deliberate. Evans tensed, his hand instinctively moving closer to the sidearm on his belt, a ridiculous theatrical gesture of caution that wasn't lost on the more observant recruits. The old man wasn't a threat, he was just old, but Evans was committed to the drama. From his jacket, Glenn produced a simple, cracked leather wallet. It looked as ancient as he did. He fumbled with it for a moment, his stiff fingers struggling with the worn folds. Evans rolled his eyes with exaggerated impatience. "Come on, Grandpa. We don't have all day. The sun's getting hot. These recruits need to be on the infiltration course in 5 minutes." A younger instructor, Corporal Davies, stepped forward hesitantly. "Sergeant, maybe I should just escort him back to the gate." Davies's face was tight with discomfort. Something about the old man's stillness felt wrong, out of place. It wasn't the confusion of a lost civilian. It was the calm of a mountain. "Stay out of this, Corporal," Evans snapped without looking at him. "I'm handling this. This is a teachable moment about situational awareness and base security." He turned his glare back to Glenn, who had finally extracted a state-issued driver's license. Evans snatched it from his hand. He glanced at it, then let out a short, barking laugh. "Glenn Whitman. Well, Glenn Whitman, this little piece of plastic doesn't give you the right to be here. You see these kids?" He gestured to the formation. "They're learning to be soldiers. They're learning about discipline, about following orders, about respecting the uniform. And you are a distraction." He then focused on the jacket. "What is this thing anyway?" He flicked the worn fabric with his fingertips. "Some kind of antique store find. And this patch," he leaned in, peering at the faded stitching on Glenn's sleeve. "Never seen anything like it. Probably something you ordered from a catalog to look tough." As Sergeant Evans's finger touched the coarse fabric of the patch, the world dissolved. The bright, unforgiving sunlight of the training field vanished, replaced by a suffocating, humid darkness. The air, thick with the smell of mud and cordite, vibrated with the rhythmic whump-whump-whump of helicopter blades somewhere overhead. Rain, warm and constant, dripped from unseen leaves, tracing cold paths down the face of a much younger man. The same patch, its colors still vibrant, a deep forest green embroidered with a gray, spectral bird of prey, was stitched to the sleeve of his jungle fatigues. A voice hoarse with exhaustion whispered beside him in the dark. "They're coming again. Get ready." The flash of a muzzle, the scream of a man, the primal terror, it all hit him in a fraction of a second, a lifetime of violence compressed into a single searing image. Then just as quickly it was gone. He was back on the parade ground. Sergeant Evans was still sneering, his finger still prodding the patch. Glenn hadn't flinched. Not a single muscle in his face had moved. To the outside world, nothing had happened. But the ghost of the jungle was now with him, standing silent in the oppressive heat. From 100 yards away, standing near a dusty Humvee, Lieutenant Miller watched the scene unfold through his binoculars. He was a new officer, barely a year on the base, assigned to observe training exercises and write after-action reports. He was supposed to be a ghost, seen but not heard. But what he was seeing made his stomach churn. He'd seen the old man walk out onto the edge of the field an hour ago, moving with a slow, deliberate purpose that didn't feel like someone who was lost. He'd watched him find a spot in the back of the newly formed platoon, standing at a perfect if slightly stooped parade rest. Miller had assumed a base employee was kindly redirecting him. But then Sergeant Evans had started in. Miller lowered his binoculars. Evans was a known quantity on base, a highly effective trainer with an ego the size of a barracks. He was also a bully, and he was bullying a civilian, an elderly civilian. That was a problem, a big one. Every instinct in Miller's officer training screamed at him to intervene, to uphold the Army's values. But a bigger, more primal instinct, the self-preservation of a junior officer, told him that confronting a senior NCO in front of his troops was a career-ending move. He could drive over there, pull rank, but what would he say? "Sergeant, please be nicer to the trespassing civilian." Evans would eat him alive and he'd become a laughingstock among the enlisted ranks. He could call the MPs, but that felt like escalating the situation in a way that would only bring more trouble and humiliation down on the old man. Evans's voice, amplified by his rage, carried across the field. "I said, who the hell are you?" He was yelling the old man's name now, reading it off the license again. "Glenn Whitman. You are in a world of trouble, Glenn Whitman." The name hung in the air. Glenn Whitman. It didn't mean anything to Miller, but something about the way Evans was behaving, the absolute certainty of his own authority against the absolute calm of the old man, felt like a lit fuse. This was going to go bad. Miller knew it. He couldn't stand by and do nothing. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the number for the base MPs. No, that wasn't right. This wasn't a law enforcement issue. This was something else. He scrolled through his contacts. He needed advice. He needed someone who understood the intricate, unwritten rules of this life. Someone who had seen it all. He found the number he was looking for. The direct line to the office of the command sergeant major of the entire base. It was a huge overstep, a massive breach of the chain of command, but it was better than the alternative. His heart pounded as the phone rang. A crisp professional voice answered. "Command Sergeant Major's office." "This is Lieutenant Miller," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm out at Range 7 observing Alpha Company's drills. I have a situation here." "A situation, Lieutenant?" The voice was already tinged with impatience. "Is someone injured?" "No, Sergeant. There's a civilian on the field. An elderly man. Sergeant Evans is confronting him. It's getting pretty heated." A sigh came through the phone. "Understood, Lieutenant. Tell Sergeant Evans to escort the individual to the gate and file a trespassing report. This is not a command-level issue." "Sergeant, I don't think that's—" "He won't listen," Miller stammered, knowing how weak he sounded. "The thing is, the man's name is Glenn Whitman." He repeated the name he'd heard Evans shout, the syllables feeling foreign and important in his own mouth. For a long moment, there was only silence on the other end of the line. Miller thought the call had been dropped. Then the voice came back, and all the bureaucratic boredom was gone. It was replaced by a tone of cold, sharp urgency that made the hair on Miller's arms stand up. "Lieutenant Miller, what was that name again?" "Whitman, Sergeant. Glenn Whitman." Another pause, shorter this time. "Son, are you sure?" "Yes, Sergeant." Sergeant Evans read it off his ID. The voice on the other end became pure steel. "Lieutenant, listen to me very carefully. Do not let Sergeant Evans or anyone else lay a hand on that man. Do not let him be moved. Do not let him be searched. You are to maintain visual contact and ensure his safety until I get there. Is that understood?" "But Sergeant, how am I supposed to?" "That was not a suggestion, Lieutenant. That was a direct order from this office. Keep that man safe. We are on our way." The line went dead. Miller stared at his phone, his mind reeling. What had he just done? Who in the world was Glenn Whitman? Inside the base headquarters, Command Sergeant Major Thompson stood ramrod straight, the phone still pressed to his ear as if he could absorb more information through sheer will. He lowered it slowly. His face, normally a mask of disciplined composure, was pale. He had not heard that name spoken aloud in 30 years, not since a classified history briefing he'd received as a young NCO at a Special Operations Command. He had assumed it was a legend, a ghost story the old-timers told. He didn't knock. He burst through the adjoining door into the office of Major General Wallace, the base commander. The general, a man with silver hair and a chest full of medals that told the story of America's conflicts for the past 3 decades, looked up from a stack of reports, his eyes narrowed in annoyance at the intrusion. "Sergeant Major, I trust the building is on fire?" "Worse, General," Thompson said, his voice tight. "We have a code Phoenix." Wallace froze, the pen in his hand hovering over the paper. He stared at his senior NCO. "A code Phoenix? Thompson, that's a historical protocol. It was retired in the 70s. "It's a myth." "It's not a myth, sir," Thompson said, his voice low and intense. "He's here, on range 7, Glenn Whitman." The general's face went through a rapid series of transformations, from disbelief to confusion to a profound and unmistakable awe. He slowly stood up, his towering frame seeming to fill the room. He walked to the window, looking out toward the distant training ranges, as if he could see the man himself. "Get my vehicle," the general commanded, his voice a low rumble of authority. "And get the honor guard. Full dress uniform. Now, Sergeant Major, move." Back on the sun-baked field, Sergeant Evans's patience had completely evaporated. The old man's quiet defiance was an insult to his authority, an unacceptable crack in the perfect facade of control he maintained over his recruits. The apathetic stare, the simple, maddeningly calm answers, it was all a performance, and Evans was going to end it. "That's it. I'm done asking," Evans snarled, his face a blotchy red. "You're a trespasser, you're a security risk, and you're disrupting military training. You're a threat. Old man, you are officially under arrest." He reached out and grabbed Glenn's arm. The skin was thin and papery, but the muscle and bone beneath it were like stone. For a moment, it felt to Evans like grabbing hold of a statue. Glenn didn't resist, but he didn't yield either. He simply stood there, a fixed point in Evans's swirling vortex of fury. "You're going to come with me," Evans said, yanking on the arm. "We're going to find out just who you are. Maybe a nice long chat with base intelligence will loosen that tongue of yours. Or maybe you're just senile. A full medical evaluation might be in order." The threat hung in the air, ugly and final. The recruits were no longer entertained. They were silent, watching with wide, uncomfortable eyes. They were witnessing a line being crossed. This was no longer training. It was cruelty. Corporal Davies took another half-step forward. His mouth opened to protest, but the sound was choked off by the sudden, disciplined crunch of tires on the gravel access road. Heads turned. 3 black, immaculate command vehicles were approaching, moving not with the frantic haste of an emergency, but with the unstoppable momentum of destiny. They weren't using lights or sirens. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was a siren that screamed of authority. They pulled to a stop in a perfectly spaced line, kicking up a cloud of fine dust that seemed to momentarily veil them in a shroud of importance. The doors opened in near-perfect unison. From the lead vehicle stepped Major General Wallace, his uniform so crisp it looked like it could cut glass, his 2 stars glinting in the sun. From the second, Command Sergeant Major Thompson, and from the third, 4 soldiers from the base honor guard, their dress blues a stark, formal contrast to the field uniforms of the recruits, their rifles held with ceremonial precision. The entire training field went silent. The only sound was the hot wind whistling over the dry grass. Sergeant Evans froze, his hand still clamped on Glenn Whitman's arm. He stared at the approaching general, his mind struggling to process what was happening. A general didn't come to a live fire range for a trespassing incident. A general didn't bring the honor guard. His brain cycled through a dozen possible explanations, each one more terrifying than the last. He had screwed up. He had screwed up in a way he couldn't yet comprehend, but the scale of which was being measured by the number of stars walking toward him. General Wallace's eyes were like chips of ice. He completely ignored the existence of Sergeant Evans. His gaze was fixed, locked onto the old man in the faded jacket. He marched directly toward him, his command sergeant major a half-step behind. The honor guard followed, their movements sharp and synchronized. They stopped 3 feet in front of Glenn Whitman. Then, in the stunned silence, General Wallace brought his hand up in a salute. It was not a casual gesture. It was the sharpest, most profound salute he had ever rendered in his life. His arm was a straight, rigid line, his posture a testament to 30 years of discipline, all of it now directed in a show of pure, unadulterated respect for the civilian in front of him. "Mr. Whitman." The general's voice was a low, powerful baritone that carried across the entire field. "It is an honor to have you on my base, sir." A collective gasp went through the recruits. They stared, slack-jawed, as their base commander, a man they considered practically a god, stood at attention for the senile old man their drill sergeant had just been threatening. Sergeant Evans let go of Glenn's arm as if it had burned him. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, waxy white. Glenn Whitman simply nodded, a slow, tired acknowledgement. "General," he said, his voice as quiet as ever. The general held his salute for a long moment before dropping it. He then turned slightly, so he was addressing not just Glenn but the entire formation of wide-eyed recruits. "For those of you who are confused," the general began, his voice ringing with a cold fury that was far more terrifying than Evans's hot-tempered yelling, "let me provide you with a history lesson. A lesson that Sergeant Evans here seems to have forgotten." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "You are in the presence of a hero, not a hero in the way we use the word lightly. You are in the presence of a legend. This is Glenn Whitman." He pointed to the faded patch on Glenn's sleeve. This patch, which some of you might have found amusing, is the symbol of MACV-SOG, Studies and Observation Group. Specifically, this is the patch of a spike team that operated under that command. A ghost unit so secret that for 30 years the United States government denied its existence. They were called the Phantoms. They went on missions across the fence in Laos and Cambodia, missions nobody else would take. Their casualty rate was 100%. Every single one of them was either killed or wounded or both. He took a step closer to Glenn. "Mr. Whitman is the last of them. He is the sole survivor of the Phantoms. In 1968, during an operation to rescue a downed pilot deep in enemy territory, his 12-man team was compromised and surrounded by an entire enemy battalion. For 3 days they held their ground, calling in airstrikes on their own position. Glenn Whitman, then a 20-year-old sergeant, was wounded 5 times. He refused medevac, staying with his men until the very end. When reinforcements finally broke through, they found him, the last man standing, protecting the bodies of his 11 comrades. The general's voice grew thick with emotion. For his actions, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. What the official record doesn't say, because it was classified until 2005, is that he was also awarded the Medal of Honor. He is one of the most decorated soldiers in the history of the United States Army. He doesn't wear his medals, he doesn't ask for recognition, but he has earned our respect 1,000 times over. The recruits stared at Glenn, no longer seeing a frail old man but a titan. They looked at his wrinkled face and tried to imagine him as a young man, wounded and alone in a jungle halfway around the world. Lieutenant Miller, watching from a distance, felt a profound sense of relief and humility wash over him. And Sergeant Evans just stood there, swaying slightly on his feet, his world completely and irrevocably shattered. General Wallace finally turned his ice-cold gaze on Sergeant Evans. The general didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The quiet condemnation was infinitely more devastating. "Sergeant," he said, his voice dangerously low, "the ground you stand on, this place where you are privileged to train the next generation of American soldiers, was paid for by the sacrifice of men like him. You treated him with contempt. You humiliated him. You laid hands on him. He let the last accusation hang in the air, a mortal sin in the military world. You have not only failed as a non-commissioned officer, you have failed as a soldier. You will report to my office at 1600 hours. Bring your commanding officer. You will pack your personal items from your desk, because as of this moment your career as a drill sergeant is over." Evans could only manage a choked, "Yes, General." He looked small, pathetic, a bully stripped of his power. Just as the general was about to turn away, Glenn Whitman took a shuffling step forward. He placed a frail hand on the general's perfectly starched sleeve. "General," he said softly, "the boy was just doing his job. He's young, full of fire. We needed men like him once. We still do. Don't ruin him. Teach him." The magnanimity of the gesture was stunning. Here was a man who had been publicly berated and threatened, and his first instinct was to show grace to his tormentor. The general looked down at the old man, his hard expression softening slightly. He nodded. "Your compassion does you credit, Mr. Whitman, as always." As Glenn spoke, another image flickered behind his eyes, sharper and more poignant than the first. He was 20 years old again, huddled in a sandbag bunker. The air was thick with the smell of blood and ozone. His captain, a man he'd worshipped, was lying on a cot, his uniform soaked in red. The captain coughed, a wet, rattling sound. He clumsily tore the phantom patch from his own sleeve and pressed it into Glenn's hand. His fingers were cold. "Make them remember us, Whitman," the captain whispered, his voice fading. "Don't let us be forgotten." Weeks later, the incident on Range 7 had become a cautionary legend on the base. General Wallace had been true to his word. A new block of instruction titled the Whitman Protocol was now mandatory for all leadership training. It covered the history of clandestine units and emphasized the importance of treating all veterans, regardless of appearance, with the dignity they had earned. The official base newspaper ran a full-page feature on Glenn Whitman and the Phantoms, finally giving them the public honor they had long been denied. Evans was not drummed out of the Army. Glenn's plea had saved him from that. Instead, he was reassigned to a records warehouse on the quietest part of the base, a purgatory of filing cabinets and dust. His days of shouting at recruits were over. His promising career had hit a brick wall. One rainy Tuesday, Evans was leaving the commissary when he saw him. Glenn Whitman was sitting on a bench near the entrance, patiently waiting for the rain to slacken. Evans froze. He wanted to turn and walk away, to disappear, but he couldn't. He walked slowly toward the bench, his heart pounding with shame. He stopped a few feet away, unsure what to say. Glenn looked up, his pale blue eyes seeming to see right through him. He offered no malice, no judgment. He simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, of closure, and perhaps of forgiveness. Evans nodded back, a lump forming in his throat, and walked away into the rain, a lesser man who had learned a lesson from a greater one. A junior officer later asked the general why Glenn had been on the range in the first place. The general explained that it was the anniversary of the Phantom's final mission. Every year on that day, Glenn Whitman came to the base and stood on the edge of the training fields, not to relive the horror, but to stand in formation one last time, with the ghosts of the 11 brothers he had never left behind. Stories like Glenn Whitman's remind us that heroes walk among us every day. If you were moved by his story, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more.